Off topic, we back. This one's 12. Been having a lot of art conversations. So I'm trying to figure out, is it me or is it seem that like scale makes a major difference in whether your artwork gets pushed up or gets more credibility? So that's the question I want to discuss. Uh, so when I was in grad school, my professor Solomon ECKJ, uh, would always say go bigger. Yes, this was grad school. So you might make a painting or an artwork with a canvas that you got that was handed to you, that you had to get for class size. Um, but then when you reach the next level, there was something about needing to create larger work, right? Unless the type of work that you were creating could only be created at a small scale, and even then, that scale or those limits could be expounded upon. That's kind of the goal of grad school, but seems to be something about large works that make a difference in whether your artwork is trusted in a way. For one, working at scale, you have to learn a lot more about what degree of detail is necessary in the work that you're creating. You very easily can underwork your canvas. And I'm gonna just speak towards painting and canvas at this point. You can apply it to whatever type of artwork you might create. You can probably apply this to music, writing, any other art, probably. But I'll try to keep it focused on painting and drawing. So I made detail. Um, One thing with larger works, detail becomes a little bit easier. You don't have to like try and squeeze or figure out proportions if you're talking like figurative work within such a small space. This ain't coming out good, and I don't like it. I'm gonna jump. I'm gonna jump. All right, cause I remember watching a video on Kerry James Marshall, and he spoke about the importance of working at a larger scale. From his point of view and his works, which are mainly figurative, it was about presence, importance, and ensuring that, or more so making a statement that these people's bodies, these people's existences, their lives are just as important as anybody else's. If you're familiar with his work, or if you're not familiar with his work, he paints these vibrantly colored, many times, figurative paintings, but all the figure's skin is painted jet black. There's very little value shift in his works, in the figures. And for him, the idea is that he wanted to just paint the most like stark, dark imagery of figures he could paint, so that there was no confusion about who his work was about or what his work was about. So it was almost like we just went to an extreme of a certain imagery, to make a point, make a statement. So as opposed to even doing a bunch of like variations in skin tones to suggest the the range of diasporic skin tones, African diasporic skin tones. He just hit you with the real. This is what I'm talking about. So it's like whether you identify with it or not, it's very easy for you to decide based on what you see. Um, but those bodies being that scale, life size or larger, makes a difference. And I can say that when I have created at that scale, especially at studio practice as opposed to murals, it it says something. I would say murals work too, but murals I've painted, I haven't felt quite that feeling. But studio practice for sure. I made a painting of, based on my father, And as I was working on it, I think between the mix of it being a larger figure on a canvas or on board, and then also uh, the suggestion of relationship from father to son, there was this revelation of, um, or more so this replication of my father's role in my life. Someone who's larger than life to me, not on a like flamboyant like whatever, but a person who, whenever I envision him, he's always 10 feet tall. Uh, Even though we're about the same height, his importance in my life hasn't changed because of his role in in our relationship. So it hit in two ways in that regard. And this has happened as far as how I think of certain people many times. So if I'm not around a person who might be shorter than me, but played a pivotal role in some of my development and my growth, I envision them as these massive beings. It's a more spiritual, it's just a higher level of experience. So scale plays a major role. And I think on the other end, on maybe the art practice end and the economic end of making artwork and making a life out of making art, scale shows a certain degree of commitment to the practice. So as you can work in a sketchbook size for drawings or paintings, um, at that at that at that size, it could still feel amateurish, hobbyish, something I could do on the side. I've been making this analogy that like if you can, well, it's not an analogy, but um, I always feel like if you can fit the canvas in your car, a normal size sedan, whatever, if you can fit the canvas built inside your car, then you're not making artwork large enough. Now the issue is this can run you into uh, 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 a wall of not wanting to create because you can't create at the scale that you want to create. A 36 by 48 size painting is not small. Um, it's large for most average, you know, homes, I would say, and typical wall spaces, whether it's vertical or horizontal. 3 foot by 4 foot can cover a decent amount of space, and most people don't have walls that carry much larger than that. And unless that's your goal, just to like decorate homes, larger works can tell better stories. There's a commitment from the amount of materials that you use, um, commitment to understanding how much differently you have to create, or how much differently you could, well, so you have to create for a certain scale, the amount of attention and time that it takes to get into that scale. As I've experienced, my material application for my works takes on a different level of application because of the scale or the spaces or the size of the spaces in which I'm working on. So as you see, for example, the works in the background, um, if you look at maybe one, geometric shape on there and consider that, an artwork was within that range, maybe like a 16 by 20, I'll say, uh, I can get a lot more smoother applications of the paint uh, because it takes less brush strokes, less material, and over a smaller space. Um, the paint that won't dry as fast. So I can work on a 16 by 20, I might be working a 4 by 6 size shape, and I can paint that over pretty quickly and get a certain quality of transparency, movement of the brush strokes. But when I expand that to a larger space, being that I'm working with acrylics, the material dries fairly quickly. You can add stuff to make sure that your paints don't dry as fast, but from my experience thus far, any amount of adding stuff to it, I still run into this issue of application where if I spend too much time working the material, um, it becomes, not muddy, but the material becomes uh, unevenly applied. You get kind of like, I'm starting to like pull paint off rather than applying paint. And so I had to learn to switch up my brushstroke style inside the shapes in order to work a larger space. And as I started to understand this, as I started to work larger, I realized that I had something to add to my repertoire, something to add to the story of my work. And the visual language got to shift a bit because of having to deal with this issue. And especially when it comes to like blending colors within a shape as well. So if it's just one color, it's a little bit easier. But if I'm blending, I have to consider drying times, adding brush strokes, and then reapplying and addressing the blend as it happens. So there's a lot of fast moving thoughts and actions that have to go into working larger. But does it at that scale, become more important? I think it does. It's more space. It's vast. Right? It's more space for me to consider the um, the story, even in abstraction. The way these works started was I prepped it out, planned it, and I had other people, because it was community work, apply paint to the first layer. So it's a lot of different textures, imagery, some of it just abstract or just kind of smooth applications of paint, some of it like storytelling and scenes, not too many figures, but some figurative. Um, and so as I apply paint on top of that, I had to consider all of those things. And across a larger scale, I had to figure out how to make it all look cohesive. So there's more layers that I have to apply in a very strategic manner to ensure that I get the work to look a certain way. And my goals typically, when I make my works, my abstract works, I've determined that it takes 3 layers for it to start to feel like a complete painting, where the layers look and feel like layers. So like one layer, obviously it doesn't. It just looks like one layer. Maybe it's transparently colored. So that first layer happens. The second layer goes on top of that, and you have some relationship, but you're really just looking at the relationship of one color over the other. But when that third one comes in, it just pops. There's a certain depth that comes from it, and that's what I look for to determine if the work is even working yet. I don't even consider much before that. So those first 2 layers are almost like shut your mind off, just apply colors where it feels like it makes the best sense or makes the most contrast. And then when I do my third layer, then I take a real look at whether the work is, what direction the work is going in, and I can choose what colors to start to apply, how I need to achieve that, and if I think I'm going to need more layers or not. I think most of these I stopped at the third layer, and I was aiming for that layer to stop because just how I was, the speed in which I was trying to work and the amount of work I was trying to cover and paint at the same time. And I got to a spot where I felt comfortable saying like this is complete. I forgot a stage in the process, but I applied it to the next ones, and there's still room for these, I think, to grow a little more. What I had to learn too is that the third layer didn't have to mean the last layer. It might just mean the last full layer that I paint across the entire canvas. So I might go back and like do a section just to add some more depth because it's missing something. So, but I really was supposed to be talking about scale, right? But maybe I've said what I needed to say about scale, because this is really just a study vlog, sketch vlog. I ain't supposed to get too detailed, but I do find myself wanting to work larger because I know if I had the space, I would. So the next challenge is either making that happen in the space that I have, or using some of the access to spaces that I may have to do that. And it all comes with like layers of finding space to photograph, and this is all really just looking at taking inventory on where I am with what I have created and what I can do with what I have. Because I'm still working on a very much smaller scale work. Scale. There's also the idea of scale by volume versus dimension. So I could have a show of my first abstract series or paintings that I made when I moved to San Diego was a series of 100 small geoscape abstract paintings. And it was to help me build like a visual language. It worked really well. All the paintings were 8 by 10, and my goal was to either sell them all at that size. But when I got the opportunity to show some off, I was like, how would I show it off? And I was like, oh, what they could make a larger size artwork as smaller pieces that make up pretty much a grid of paintings. And so I presented them that way in like I want to say a 4 by 5, like 20 pieces on a wall, but as one grid. So you could make a bunch of small items that connected make a larger image, or just take up a lot of space in how it's exhibited. And you could buy. I've seen that at the gallery I worked at, where we installed this show of. We had a bunch of other artworks, but we also made these like they weren't coconuts, but they were pretty much like coconut shells, gourds. And so we took those and installed them like sporadically, essentially throughout the canvas. And people bought them as like groupings. We sold them as like 1 or 2 pieces, but people bought them as groupings. And so those are other ways that scale can be explored, in which you can work with smaller items within your space and then make a larger work. The same thing happened with another artist, Gail Roberts, we had at the gallery, where she filled the 2 walls that we had from like floor to ceiling of paintings, but all the paintings were 20 by 24 inches. So they were all the same size, but then also the imagery on the paintings were of typically small subjects, which were flowers. You just had a zoomed in image of a flower that she painted, and they were all about the same size. The flowers in each painting, and we covered the walls. And again, people bought them in groupings, and so that's another way to explore scale. So it's exploring scale by volume. So that's kind of something I'm working on with the smaller size drawings that I'm working on now. Now I've worked large with drawings, like life-size drawings, but I haven't done a lot to have a show full of like large drawings. So what I'm considering now is a smaller scale of drawings, 18 by 24 size, that I can do a bunch of, and then tell a story in a different way. Maybe thinking about the scale of the space that you might exhibit in, where if it's a smaller space, you might, 20 small artworks in a smaller space might feel more, feel larger compared to 20 artworks in, a large museum space, or trying to fill a gallery space inside a museum. You'll just have these sparse, small pieces. So, I think it is very important to work larger, but sometimes it feels as though it's reserved for, a particular type of artist, and you typically see these larger works in museums, and I've installed some large works in homes, and if that's the goal, right? That's for me. That's what I would love, like have my work bought by um, big time collectors and galleries, not galleries, galleries sell work, but museums. And I don't think that those spaces see smaller works as trusted in a way. Um, some of it, you can be a trusted artist by volume because of having that breadth of work. You have a lot to obviously say, and people can trust in that. Um, but I think scale also, again, I think it's just a certain level of like respect that comes from that. And as artists, you would feel it. If you worked larger, you would feel it. Like, oh, I just like when you transition to working even larger, you're like, oh man, like just the amount of energy and thought and challenge that goes into making this. I understand why these larger works that are in museums get the recognition that they get. So go big or go home, right? That's the idea. But that's gonna be this. Dang, I just stole that from somebody. So that's gonna be this because I know what my thing is. Off topic vlog 12. We talking scale. But I shouldn't have to tell you to like, share, and subscribe, comment. But do that. Peace.